Eve wakes to pounding on her apartment door and her mother's voice screaming, "Break down the door! This is our son's apartment!" Heart racing, Eve clutches her phone, ready to call 911. Just yesterday, she'd stood her ground at the family gathering, publicly revealing her mother's years of financial theft and emotional abuse. They'd sworn revenge when she kicked them out. Now they're back with reinforcements. Eve grabs the only weapon she has, her truth, and opens the door to face her tormentors. My hands were shaking as I stared at the bank statement spread across my kitchen table. The apartment around me was quiet, but my mind was screaming. 3 credit cards opened in my name that I never applied for. Over $20,000 in debt, that wasn't mine. And the signature on the applications? A perfect forgery of my own. I'm Eve Parker, 29 years old, and until last week, I thought I was finally getting my life together. Working as a paralegal at Wilson & Wright Law while studying for the LSAT had been grueling, but worth it. After years of saving every penny, I'd managed to buy this modest 1-bedroom apartment in a decent part of town. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. Or so I thought. The discovery of the credit cards was just the beginning. When I called the bank to report the fraud, they informed me that the cards had been opened 6 months ago, around the same time I was purchasing my apartment. The same apartment my mother, Jackie, had insisted on helping me with the paperwork for because real estate is complicated, sweetie. I should have known better. Nothing with my mother came without strings. Growing up as Jackie Parker's daughter had been an exercise in invisibility. My older brother Cody was the golden child, the favorite, the one who could do no wrong. My mother referred to him as my son in a tone dripping with pride. I was always the mistake or the afterthought. Not to my face, of course. Jackie was too clever for that. But I'd overheard enough conversations, seen enough of the dramatic difference in how we were treated. My father, Randall, was no help. A passive man who avoided conflict at all costs, he'd learned early in their marriage that disagreeing with Jackie was more trouble than it was worth. He retreated into his work, leaving us kids to navigate the stormy waters of my mother's unpredictable moods alone. I'd moved out at 18, put myself through community college, then state university, working 2 jobs, and taking out minimal loans. I maintained limited contact with my family, obligatory holiday gatherings, the occasional Sunday dinner when guilt overwhelmed my self-preservation instincts, always hoping that this time would be different. That this time, my achievements would be acknowledged, my boundaries respected. They never were. But this latest discovery was beyond anything I could have imagined. I dug deeper into my financial records, pulling my credit reports, examining bank statements from joint accounts I thought had been closed years ago. What I found made me physically ill. Not only had my mother opened credit cards in my name, but she'd also somehow remained on my checking account from when she'd helped me open it as a teenager. Small withdrawals, $50 here, $75 there, spread out over years. Money I'd attributed to my own poor tracking or unnecessary spending. It added up to thousands. But the real shock came when I found a folder hidden in my mother's desk while I was searching for my birth certificate. I wasn't snooping. I needed the document for my law school applications, and she'd always kept all our important papers. Inside the folder were printouts of transactions from the family business Parker Printing, the shop my grandmother had started 40 years ago and that my mother now managed. Suspicious transfers, falsified invoices, and at the bottom of several documents, a crude attempt at forging my signature. My blood ran cold as I realized what I was looking at. My mother hadn't just been stealing from me. She'd been embezzling from the family business and setting me up to take the fall if anyone ever noticed. The evidence was damning. Transfers to accounts I'd never heard of. Invoices for services never rendered. And, most disturbing of all, a draft of a letter to my grandmother, written as if from me, confessing to taking the money and begging forgiveness. I sat in my car outside their house, documents in hand, wondering if confronting them alone was wise. But what choice did I have? This was my life, my future, my good name being destroyed by the one person who should have protected me above all others. I steeled myself and walked to the door, hoping against hope there was some explanation, some misunderstanding. But deep down I knew. I'd been the family scapegoat for 29 years. Why would now be any different? The scent of roasted turkey and pumpkin pie filled my grandmother's house, but all I could smell was anxiety. This year's Thanksgiving gathering was mandatory. Grandma Jean had been explicit about that, and I'd planned to tell everyone about my law school acceptance. It wasn't Harvard, but Suffolk Law had a solid program, and I'd earned a partial scholarship. For once, I was going to claim my moment. My mother had other plans. Everyone. Jackie clinked her glass with a spoon, her voice carrying that artificial sweetness she used in public. I have wonderful news. All eyes turned to her, including mine. I felt a familiar sinking in my stomach. Eve got a promotion at the law firm, she began, and for a split second, I felt a surge of surprised gratitude that she'd remembered. Then she continued. But more importantly, our Cody has finally found his calling. And there it was. The familiar redirection, the way my achievements became stepping stones to showcase her golden child. I watched as my brother shuffled awkwardly, a mixture of embarrassment and entitlement on his face. After some setbacks with his last business venture, Cody has discovered an amazing opportunity in cryptocurrency trading, she announced. Setbacks was a generous way to describe the complete failure of my brother's food truck business, which had collapsed after 3 months, despite a $50,000 loan from our parents. A loan I now suspected came partially from the credit cards opened in my name. And your father and I are investing in his new company, Jackie concluded triumphantly. My Aunt Linda shot me a sympathetic glance from across the table. My cousin Zach rolled his eyes when my mother wasn't looking. Everyone knew the pattern, but no one ever challenged it. Until today. I cornered my mother in the kitchen as she was arranging pumpkin pie slices on dessert plates. Mom, we need to talk about the credit cards, I said quietly. She didn't miss a beat. What credit cards, sweetie? The ones you opened in my name. The $20,000 of debt. The money missing from Grandma's business. Her face hardened for a fraction of a second before the mask slipped back into place. She laughed, a little too loudly. Oh, Eve, always so dramatic. You know how confused you get about money? Remember that time in college when you thought your account had been hacked, but you'd just forgotten about those textbooks you bought? This isn't confusion, Mom. I have the documents, the signature forgeries, everything. She set down the pie server with deliberate calm. You know, your father and I have been worried about you. These delusions, these accusations, it's not healthy, Eve. Maybe we should talk to Dr. Bradford again. Dr. Bradford was the therapist she'd dragged me to at 16 when I'd first confronted her about her favoritism. The one who'd never spoken to me alone, who'd nodded sympathetically as my mother described my jealousy issues and attention-seeking behavior. This isn't about my mental health, and you know it, I said, my voice shaking with barely contained fury. Don't make a scene, she hissed, smile still firmly in place. Not at your grandmother's Thanksgiving. Unless you want everyone to see what you're really like when you don't get your way. We returned to the dining room, me seething, her serene. The conversation flowed around me as I pushed food around my plate. Then my mother started in on her favorite passive-aggressive game. Eve, honey, I noticed you've gone back for seconds. Are you sure that's wise with your weight struggles? She asked, voice dripping with mock concern. I felt my face flush as several sets of eyes darted in my direction. And Linda was just telling me her colleague's daughter is single too. Maybe you two could commiserate, she continued. 30 is just around the corner, you know. Something in me snapped. Years of swallowed retorts, of taking the high road, of protecting the family image crumbled under the weight of her latest betrayal. Actually, Mom, I wanted to ask you about something, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. Could you explain to everyone why there are credit cards in my name that I never applied for? Or maybe you could tell Grandma why there's money missing from the business accounts with my forged signature on the transfers. The room went completely silent. My father froze, fork halfway to his mouth. Cody looked between me and our mother, confusion evident on his face. My grandmother's expression hardened as she turned to look at her daughter. What is she talking about, Jacqueline? Grandma Jean asked, using my mother's full name always a bad sign. Jackie's laugh was brittle. She's obviously confused again. Eve has always had such an active imagination. I have copies of everything, I said, reaching for my purse. The credit card statements, the transfers, the forged documents, everything. The color drained from my mother's face. My father finally spoke up. Jackie, what did you do? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. What followed was the most chaotic family dinner in Parker history. My mother alternated between vehement denial and vicious attacks on my character. My father seemed genuinely shocked. Cody retreated into sullen silence when he realized his cryptocurrency venture was likely funded by stolen money. And through it all, my grandmother sat at the head of the table, her expression growing stormier by the minute as she examined the evidence I'd brought. "Enough," she finally said, her voice cutting through my mother's latest tirade about my instability. All eyes turned to Grandma Jean, the family matriarch at 72, still sharp as a tack and brooking no nonsense. "Eve, I owe you an apology," she said. "It seems I've been blind to what's been happening in my own family and my own business." My mother started to protest, but Grandma silenced her with a look. "Jacqueline, not another word. We will discuss this tomorrow at the lawyer's office. Everyone else, I think it's time we called this dinner to a close." As people began to gather their things in awkward silence, my mother grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "You'll regret this," she whispered, her eyes filled with a hatred I'd never seen before, not even during our worst arguments. "You think you're so smart, but you have no idea what you've done." I pulled my arm away. "I know exactly what I've done. I've finally stood up for myself." I walked out of the house with my head high, ignoring the commotion behind me as my mother began to sob theatrically, claiming I'd betrayed the family. For the first time in my life, I didn't care what scenes she made or what lies she told. I had the truth on my side, and that was all that mattered. It wasn't until I was halfway home that the adrenaline wore off, leaving me shaking so badly I had to pull over. I'd done it. After years of emotional abuse and manipulation, I'd finally exposed my mother for who she truly was. But as I sat there in my car, tears streaming down my face, I knew this was just the beginning. Jackie Parker wasn't going to go down without a fight. And I had no idea how ugly that fight was about to get. The lock on my apartment door clicked as I turned the key, and I nearly wept with relief at the sound. Home, safe, alone. After the nuclear explosion that was our family Thanksgiving, all I wanted was to crawl into bed and sleep for about a week. My phone had been buzzing incessantly since I'd left my grandmother's house. I finally checked it in the elevator up to my 6th-floor apartment. 23 missed calls. 47 text messages. Most from my mother, but some from my father and Cody, too. I scrolled through them with growing unease. From Mom. "How dare you humiliate me like that, after everything I've done for you?" From Dad. "Your mother is hysterical. You need to call and apologize right now." From Cody. "What the fuck, Eve? Mom's saying she might have to go to the hospital because of what you did." The messages grew increasingly hostile and manipulative. My mother threatened to cut me off from the family, as if that was a punishment rather than a relief. My father swung between demanding I make amends and pleading with me to understand how much stress my mother was under. Cody's messages devolved into name-calling and accusations. But the last text from my mother sent a chill down my spine. "You think your little apartment is your sanctuary? Nothing you have is really yours. It never was, and it never will be. We'll see how smug you are tomorrow." I called the locksmith immediately. An hour later, $200 poorer but infinitely more secure, I had new locks on my door. I sent emails to my building manager and the security desk downstairs, explaining that my estranged family members were not to be allowed into the building under any circumstances. Around 10 p.m., my doorbell rang. I approached cautiously, checking the peephole. The tight knot in my chest loosened when I saw my best friend Taylor standing in the hallway, holding a bottle of wine and a takeout bag. "I figured you might need reinforcements," she said when I opened the door, her face full of concern. Taylor and I had been friends since college. She knew my family dynamics better than anyone, having witnessed my mother's behavior firsthand on multiple occasions. "You have no idea," I said, ushering her in and relocking the door behind her. Over pad thai and probably too much Pinot Noir, I filled her in on everything: the credit card fraud, the embezzlement, the confrontation at Thanksgiving. "I have something you might want to see," Taylor said, pulling out her phone. "I recorded part of what happened today." "You what?" I stared at her in disbelief. She looked slightly embarrassed. "After what happened at your birthday dinner last year, when your mom convinced everyone you'd had too much to drink when you called her out. I've kind of made it a habit to record when she starts in on you, just in case you needed proof someday." I watched the video with a mixture of vindication and horror. There was my mother, Her face contorted with rage as she spat accusations at me. There was my father, looking lost and confused. And there was my brother, initially defending our mother, until the evidence became too overwhelming to ignore. "You're a lifesaver," I told Taylor, giving her a fierce hug. "I've got your back," she said. "Always have, always will." My phone rang around midnight. It was my grandmother. I hesitated before answering, but Taylor nodded encouragingly. "Eve? Are you all right?" Grandma Jean asked, her voice weary but kind. "I'm okay," I said, surprised to find I actually meant it. "How are you holding up?" "I've been better," she admitted. "I've spent the last 4 hours going through the business accounts with my accountant. It's worse than you know, sweetheart. Much worse." My heart sank. "I'm so sorry, Grandma." "Don't you dare apologize," she said firmly. "You didn't do this, Jacqueline did. And she's going to face the consequences." We talked for nearly an hour. She explained that she'd already contacted her lawyer and would be filing police reports for the embezzlement. She encouraged me to do the same for the identity theft and credit card fraud. "What about Dad and Cody?" I asked, voicing the question that had been nagging at me. "Do you think they knew?" There was a long pause. "I don't know," she finally said. "Randall has always been willfully blind when it comes to your mother. And Cody, well, he's been so thoroughly under her thumb for so long, it's hard to say what he knows and what he's convinced himself to believe." After we hung up, I felt both lighter and heavier. The truth was finally coming out, but the road ahead looked rocky at best. My phone pinged with a text from my Aunt Linda, my father's sister. "Just a heads up, your mother is on the warpath. She, your dad, and Cody had some kind of meeting tonight. I overheard them talking about taking back what's theirs and something about your apartment. Be careful, honey." A cold knot of fear formed in my stomach. Taylor read the message over my shoulder and immediately went into crisis management mode. "You're not staying here alone tonight," she declared. "I'm crashing on your couch." I was too exhausted to argue. We made up the sofa for her, and I retreated to my bedroom, double-checking that my new locks were engaged before collapsing onto my bed. Sleep eluded me. Every creak and groan of the building had me sitting up in alarm. Around 3 a.m., I got up and began gathering all my important documents: birth certificate, social security card, passport, financial records, the evidence against my mother, and secured them in a locked fireproof box. While doing so, I noticed something odd about the smoke detector in my hallway. It seemed slightly askew. Standing on a chair, I examined it closer and felt the blood drain from my face. It wasn't a smoke detector. Or rather, it wasn't just a smoke detector. There was a tiny camera embedded in it. With shaking hands, I searched the rest of my apartment. By dawn, I'd found 3 more cameras, one in the living room light fixture, one in the kitchen clock, and most disturbingly, one in my bedroom air vent. I woke Taylor, showing her my discoveries. Her face paled. "They've been watching you," she whispered. "For how long?" I thought back to when the devices might have been installed. The building had routine maintenance about 4 months ago. My mom insisted it was a good time for her and Dad to visit. She kept finding reasons for me to leave the apartment while they were here. "We need to call the police," Taylor said firmly. "Not yet," I replied, an idea forming. "First, I need to talk to my attorney." I'd been saving Ben Morris's number as a contact ever since he'd handled a minor fender bender for me last year. He answered on the second ring, despite it being barely 7 a.m. "Eve? Is everything all right?" I explained the situation as concisely as I could. When I finished, he was silent for several moments. "You have a case," he said finally. "Multiple cases, actually. Identity theft, fraud, invasion of privacy, stalking. But Eve, if what your aunt says is true, we need to move quickly. Can you come to my office at 9? I agreed, hanging up just as my phone pinged with another text. It was from an unknown number, but I knew immediately who it was from. "Your grandmother can't protect you. Your fancy new locks can't protect you. Nothing can protect you from what's coming." I showed the message to Taylor, who insisted on accompanying me to the attorney's office. As we gathered our things, I felt a strange calm descend over me. The worst had happened. My mother's true nature was exposed. My family was in shambles, and threats were rolling in. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't facing her manipulation alone. I had truth, evidence, and people who believed me on my side. Little did I know that in just a few hours, my newfound courage would be put to the ultimate test. The rest of that morning passed in a blur of legal discussions and paperwork. Ben, my attorney, was thorough and efficient, helping me file reports for identity theft, fraud, and the unauthorized surveillance. He seemed particularly troubled by the hidden cameras. "This crosses a very serious legal line," he explained, reviewing the photos I'd taken of the devices. "Not only is it an invasion of privacy, but the placement in your bedroom could potentially fall under voyeurism statutes." The implication made my skin crawl. My own mother had been watching me in my most private moments. The violation was almost too much to bear. "What about the apartment?" I asked. "My mother's texts seemed to be threatening my ownership somehow." Ben frowned, paging through the purchase documentation I'd brought. "Your name is the only one on the deed, but—" He paused at one of the pages. "There's something odd here. The initial deposit came from a joint account, not your personal account." My heart sank. That must have been from when I was still on the family account. "I transferred my down payment savings there temporarily because my mother said it would look better to the mortgage company if it came from a more established account." "Another manipulation," Ben noted. "It gives her a thin legal argument that family money was used for the purchase, but it's tenuous at best. Still, we should be prepared for her to try using it." By the time we finished, it was nearly 11 a.m. Taylor had waited patiently in the reception area, despite having to call in to work. She'd told her boss she had a family emergency, which wasn't far from the truth. "You should go to work," I told her as we left Ben's office. "I can handle it from here." She looked at me skeptically. "Are you sure? Your mother sounds unhinged, Eve. I don't like the idea of you facing her alone." "I won't engage with her, I promised." Ben advised me to document everything, but not respond to any communication from them. "I'm going home to get some sleep, and then I'll call the building about removing those cameras." Taylor reluctantly agreed, making me promise to call her immediately if anything happened. We parted ways and I headed back to my apartment, exhaustion settling deep in my bones. Between the confrontation at Thanksgiving, the all-night discovery of the hidden cameras, and the morning at the attorney's office, I was running on fumes. I had just settled onto my couch, intending to close my eyes for just a moment, when my phone rang. It was my grandmother. "Eve," her voice was tense. "Are you at home?" "Yes," I replied, instantly alert. "What's wrong?" "Jackie, Randall, and Cody left my house about 20 minutes ago. They were arguing in the driveway about going to your place. Something about proving the apartment belongs to Cody." I sat bolt upright. "What?" "I don't know what they're planning, but it didn't sound good. I'm on my way to you now with my lawyer, but we're at least 40 minutes out." "I'll call the building security," I said, already moving to lock my balcony door and check that all windows were secured. "Be careful, Eve. I've never seen your mother like this." After hanging up, I immediately called down to the security desk, only to be informed that the regular guard had gone on break, and his replacement hadn't arrived yet. Perfect timing? Or deliberate planning? I couldn't be sure, but I wasn't taking any chances. I called 911, explaining the situation as calmly as I could. "Unless they're actively trying to enter your unit or threatening you physically, this is a civil matter," the dispatcher explained. "But we can have an officer drive by to check the situation." It wasn't much, but it was something. I thanked her and hung up, then called Ben to update him. "Don't open the door for any reason," he advised. "If they cause a disturbance, call 911 again and report that you fear for your safety." I paced my apartment, checking my phone every few minutes. A part of me wondered if I was overreacting. Maybe my grandmother had misunderstood. Maybe they were just talking, not planning anything drastic. Then the pounding started. "Eve, open this door right now!" My mother's voice, shrill and demanding, echoed through my apartment. I froze, heart racing. This was really happening. "We know you're in there." My father this time, his voice uncharacteristically forceful. I crept to the door, careful not to make any noise, and peered through the peephole. My mother stood in the hallway, face contorted with rage. My father beside her, looking uncomfortable but determined. And Cody, lingering behind them, shifting nervously from foot to foot. "This is ridiculous, Eve," my mother called out. "This apartment belongs to Cody. You used family money to buy it." I remained silent, recording everything on my phone as Ben had advised. The pounding intensified. "If you don't open this door, we'll have to take more serious measures," my father threatened. "This is our son's apartment!" my mother screeched. "We have every right to enter!" I heard doors opening in the hallway. My neighbors were coming out to investigate the commotion. Good witnesses. "Is everything okay out here?" I recognized Mr. Dawson's voice from apartment 6C. "Family business," my mother snapped. "Our daughter has stolen property that belongs to our son. She's been having mental health issues," my father added in a stage whisper clearly meant for me to hear. "Maybe you should come back with the police if there's a real issue," suggested Mrs. Reynolds from 6 Amperes. "We've tried that route," my mother lied smoothly. "They said it's a civil matter since her name is on the lease. But the money for this place came from us, for our son." I could almost admire her ability to spin a convincing narrative on the spot, if it weren't so terrifying to be on the receiving end of it. More neighbors had gathered now. I could see at least 5 of them through the peephole, all watching the unfolding drama with varied expressions of concern and curiosity. "Cody, go get it," my mother suddenly instructed. My brother disappeared from view momentarily, then returned with something in his hand. It took me a second to recognize what it was. A crowbar. My blood ran cold. They weren't just here to argue or intimidate. They were actually planning to break into my home. I backed away from the door, my hands shaking as I dialed 911 again. "They have a crowbar," I whispered to the dispatcher. "They're threatening to break down my door." "Officers are 3 minutes out," she assured me. "Stay on the line." Through the phone, I could hear my mother's voice rising hysterically. "Break down the door! This is our son's apartment. She has no right to keep us out." "Jackie, there are witnesses," my father cautioned, sounding nervous. "I don't care. She can't get away with this." I could hear shuffling, arguments between my parents and brother, and the concerned voices of my neighbors. Then, suddenly, the elevator dinged. I prayed it was the police, but instead I heard my grandmother's authoritative voice cutting through the chaos. "Jacqueline Marie Parker, what do you think you're doing?" I nearly collapsed with relief. Grandma Jean had arrived, and from the tone of her voice, she was not pleased, not one bit. The hallway outside my apartment had transformed into a bizarre family theater, with my neighbors as the unwilling audience. Through the peephole, I watched as my grandmother marched toward my parents and brother, a tall, distinguished, gray-haired man following close behind her. "Mom, stay out of this," my mother warned, but there was a slight waver in her voice. Even in her 50s, Jackie was not immune to the authority my grandmother commanded. "I will do no such thing," Grandma Jean replied crisply. "You are about to commit a crime, and I won't stand by and watch." "It's not a crime to reclaim what's rightfully ours," my father argued, though he'd taken a step back from the door. The man with my grandmother stepped forward, extending his hand to my father. "Alan Watkins, Parker family attorney. Mr. Parker, I strongly advise against whatever you're planning here. Breaking and entering is a felony, regardless of any financial disputes." My brother Cody looked increasingly uncomfortable, the crowbar dangling awkwardly from his hand. "Mom, maybe we should just go," he muttered. "Put that thing down," Grandma Jean ordered him, and to my amazement, he immediately complied, setting the crowbar on the floor as if it had suddenly burned him. I felt a surge of hope. Maybe this could end without violence or police involvement after all. Then my mother let out a harsh laugh. "You're all so gullible. Eve has always been able to manipulate everyone with her poor little victim act. Even you, Mom." "This isn't about Eve's behavior," the attorney said evenly. "This is about financial fraud and now attempted breaking and entering." "What would you know about it?" my mother snapped. "You weren't there. You don't know what we've been through with her." "I know enough to recognize when someone is creating a narrative that doesn't match reality," Mr. Watkins replied. "The bank records speak for themselves." My mother's face contorted with rage. "Those records are fake. Eve has always been jealous of Cody. She'd do anything to make me look bad." I decided it was time to make my presence known. With my phone still recording, I opened the door just enough to speak through the security chain. "Mom," I said as calmly as I could, "everyone here has witnessed you threatening to break into my home. The police are on their way. Please leave before this gets worse." Her eyes locked onto mine with such hatred that I instinctively stepped back. "You ungrateful little snake," she hissed, "after everything I've done for you. Like stealing my identity? Or installing hidden cameras in my bedroom?" I countered, loud enough for everyone to hear. A collective gasp went up from the neighbors. My father's face paled visibly. "Jackie, what is she talking about?" he asked, turning to my mother. "She's lying, of course," my mother replied, but there was a note of uncertainty in her voice now. "Am I?" I pulled out my phone and showed the screen, displaying photos of the cameras I'd found. "Dad, did you know about these? Did you help her put them in?" My father looked genuinely shocked. No, I never. Jackie, tell me you didn't." For the first time, doubt crept into his expression as he looked at my mother. The unwavering support he'd always given her seemed to falter. "She's manipulating you again, Randall," my mother insisted, but her voice had lost some of its conviction. "I found 4 cameras, Dad," I continued. "One in my bedroom. Were you okay with Mom watching me change clothes? Watching me sleep?" My father looked physically ill. "Jackie, please tell me that's not true." Instead of answering, my mother changed tactics. "This whole thing is ridiculous. Eve has always been difficult. Ever since we found out she wasn't yours, Randall, she's been trying to tear this family apart." The hallway went completely silent. I stared at my father in shock, trying to process what I'd just heard. "What did you just say?" I whispered. My father's face had gone ashen. "Jackie, don't. Not like this." "Don't what? Tell the truth? That's what everyone wants, isn't it?" My mother's voice had taken on a manic quality. "You're not Randall's daughter, Eve. You never were. I was going to leave him for someone else, but then I got pregnant with you. I stayed for the sake of the family, but I never forgave either of you for trapping me." The words hit me like physical blows. I gripped the doorframe to steady myself, my mind reeling. "You've known this?" I asked my father, my voice barely audible. "All this time?" He couldn't meet my eyes. I suspected. "We did a home DNA test when you were 10. Jackie made me promise never to tell you." 30 years of emotional distance suddenly made terrible sense. The favoritism shown to Cody. The resentment that seemed to simmer just beneath the surface of every interaction with my mother. The way my father could never quite look me in the eye when my mother was being particularly cruel. "So I'm not a Parker?" I asked, still struggling to process the revelation. "You're more of a Parker than she is," my grandmother interjected firmly, glaring at my mother. "You're my granddaughter, DNA or no DNA. And what Jacqueline just did using this information as a weapon to hurt you tells me everything I need to know about who the real problem is in this family." The elevator dinged again, and 2 police officers stepped out. The timing couldn't have been more dramatic if it had been scripted. "We got a call about an attempted break-in?" one officer asked, taking in the crowded hallway with a practiced eye. My neighbors, who had been watching the family drama unfold with horrified fascination, began speaking all at once, pointing to the crowbar on the floor and gesturing toward my parents. As the officers sorted through the confusion, taking statements and examining the abandoned crowbar, I stood frozen in my doorway, still reeling from my mother's revelation. My grandmother made her way to my side. "Don't let her get to you," she said quietly. "This changes nothing about who you are." "It changes everything," I whispered back. "Only if you let it." She squeezed my arm gently. "We'll talk about it later when all this is sorted out. But Eve, listen to me. You are loved. You have always been loved, even if not by the people who should have loved you most." Across the hallway, I could see my father talking urgently with my mother, his gestures becoming increasingly agitated. My brother stood apart from them, looking lost. As one officer spoke with my neighbors and grandmother, the other approached me. "Ma'am, we'd like to take your statement about what happened here." I nodded numbly, still watching my father and mother. Their hushed argument was becoming more heated, my father's face flushed with anger I'd rarely seen him display. 30 years, Jackie," I heard him say, his voice breaking. 30 years of lies. And for what? So you could punish an innocent child for your mistakes?" My mother's response was lost as the officer guided me back into my apartment to take my statement. But the look on my father's face told me everything I needed to know. For the first time in my life, he was seeing my mother clearly, and he was horrified by what he saw. The next hour was a blur of police statements, legal discussions, and uncomfortable confrontations. The officers documented everything: the threats, the crowbar, the bizarre family revelations, and most importantly, the hidden cameras I'd discovered. "These are serious offenses. Officer Ramirez explained as his partner bagged the surveillance devices as evidence. Illegal surveillance, attempted breaking and entering, identity theft. Your mother could be facing significant legal consequences. I nodded, feeling strangely detached from the proceedings. The revelation that Randall Parker wasn't my biological father had left me numb, as if I were watching the events unfold from a distance. My grandmother remained by my side throughout, her steady presence the only thing keeping me grounded. Mr. Watkins, her attorney, efficiently coordinated with the officers and my own lawyer Ben, who had arrived shortly after the police. Through my open door, I could see my parents and brother still in the hallway, now separated and speaking with different officers. My father looked utterly defeated, slumped against the wall as he spoke quietly to a female officer. My mother had progressed from indignant to hysterical and back to coldly furious, her body language rigid as she answered questions. Cody caught my eye briefly, his expression unreadable. Then, to my surprise, he broke away from the officer he'd been speaking with and approached my door. "Miss, he can't come in without your permission," Officer Ramirez warned me. I hesitated, then nodded. "It's okay. He can come in." Cody stepped just inside the doorway, looking uncomfortable in the apartment he'd claimed belonged to him. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "Did you know?" I finally asked. "About the cameras? About me not being Dad's biological daughter?" He shook his head quickly. "No, I swear. Not about any of it. I mean, I knew Mom favored me, but I thought." He trailed off, looking ashamed. "I guess I didn't think about it much. It was just normal to me." "And the apartment? Did you really believe it was supposed to be yours?" He shifted uncomfortably. "Mom said the down payment came from my trust fund, that you'd manipulated Dad into putting it in your name instead of mine. And you believed her, without question. You have to understand, Eve. She's always been so convincing, so certain." He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "I don't know what's true anymore. But after seeing those cameras, God, it's sick. And what she said about you not being Dad's daughter, the way she said it, like she was glad to finally hurt you with it." He shook his head. "I'm sorry. I should have seen it sooner." It wasn't the most profound apology, but it was perhaps the most honest interaction we'd had in years. Before I could respond, a commotion erupted in the hallway. "This is outrageous," my mother's voice rang out. "You can't arrest me based on her lies." Cody and I both moved to the doorway to see what was happening. An officer was reciting Miranda rights, while my mother struggled against his grip. "Jackie, stop fighting," my father pleaded. "You're only making it worse." "How dare you take her side," she seethed at him. "After everything I've done for this family, like installing hidden cameras in our daughter's bedroom?" He shot back, his voice rising. "Like stealing from your own mother's business? Like opening credit cards in Eve's name? Tell me, Jackie. What exactly have you done for this family except lie and manipulate us?" I'd never seen my father stand up to my mother like this. Neither, apparently, had she. She stared at him in shock before her expression hardened into something cold and calculating. "None of you appreciate what I've sacrificed," she declared. "Eve isn't even your daughter, Randall. I should have left you years ago, but I stayed." "I stayed? And this is how you repay me?" "Officers," my grandmother interrupted, "I believe my daughter is having some kind of breakdown. Perhaps a psychological evaluation would be appropriate." My mother's eyes widened in fury. "You sanctimonious old witch! You think you're so perfect, but you've never understood what it's like. Always judging me, always taking Eve's side." As she continued her tirade, the officers managed to secure her hands behind her back, despite her resistance. One of them removed a small object from her purse, her phone. "Ma'am, is this the device you use to monitor the surveillance cameras?" he asked. The question seemed to snap something in my mother. With strength surprising for her small frame, she wrenched away from the officers, lunging toward my door. "Break down the door!" she screamed, though the door was already open. "This is our son's apartment!" My father and brother moved to restrain her, but she was beyond reason, caught in the grip of a rage that had been building for decades. "Mom, stop!" Cody pleaded. "This isn't helping anything." "You're all against me," she snarled. "Every one of you. After everything I've done, everything I've sacrificed, you choose her?" The officers regained control of the situation, firmly guiding my mother toward the elevator despite her continued struggles and accusations. As they waited for the doors to open, she fixed me with a stare of pure hatred. "You think you've won," she called out, "but you've destroyed this family. I hope you're happy." As the elevator doors closed on her venomous glare, a strange silence fell over the hallway. My neighbors began to disperse, murmuring amongst themselves. The remaining officer spoke quietly with my grandmother and her attorney. My father approached me hesitantly. "Eve, I don't know what to say." "There's nothing to say right now," I replied, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "I need time to process all of this." He nodded, his eyes brimming with tears. "I understand, but when you're ready, I hope we can talk. There's so much I should have told you years ago." "Like who my real father is?" I asked quietly. He flinched at the question. "Yes, that and everything else. I've failed you in so many ways, Eve. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope someday you'll let me try to make amends." As he turned to leave, following the officer who would take his statement at the station, I felt a strange mixture of anger, grief, and something else, a tentative hope that maybe, just maybe, truth could finally heal what lies had broken. My brother lingered uncertainly. "What happens now?" he asked, looking between me and our grandmother. "Now," Grandma Jean said firmly, "we begin the long process of fixing what your mother has broken, starting with the truth, all of it." I stepped back into my apartment, closing the door behind me. Through the peephole, I watched as my brother and grandmother walked toward the elevator, deep in conversation. For the first time in my life, I felt truly free of my mother's shadow, though the cost of that freedom had been incredibly high. My phone pinged with a text from Taylor. "Everything okay? Need me to come over?" I began to type a response, then paused, realizing there was no simple answer to her question. Nothing about this situation was okay. My family was fractured, possibly beyond repair. My identity had been called into question. My mother was likely facing criminal charges. And yet, as I looked around my apartment, my home, secured once again from invasion, I felt a strange sense of peace settling over me. The truth, no matter how painful, was finally out. "Still processing," I texted back, "but I think I'm going to be all right. Can I call you later?" As I set my phone down, I noticed the crowbar still lying in the hallway outside my door, visible through the peephole. The sight of it sent a chill through me, as I realized how differently this confrontation could have ended. What would have happened if my grandmother hadn't arrived when she did? If my mother had succeeded in breaking down my door? The thought was terrifying. But she hadn't succeeded. Her plans, like her lies, had finally been exposed. And in that exposure, painful as it was, lay the possibility of healing not just for me, but perhaps for what remained of my family as well. For the first time in my life, I felt truly seen. Not as the problematic daughter, the family scapegoat, or the unwanted reminder of my mother's mistakes, but as Eve Parker, a woman strong enough to stand up for the truth, even when that truth threatened to upend everything I thought I knew about myself. Whatever came next, whatever revelations, reconciliations, or legal consequences awaited, I would face it with the knowledge that I had finally broken free from the web of lies that had entangled my family for 30 years. And that, despite everything, was a victory worth celebrating. 6 months later, I stood in front of the Suffolk Law School Administration building, clutching my acceptance letter. Around me, other prospective students chatted excitedly, but I took a moment of silence to appreciate the journey that had brought me here. So much had changed since that chaotic day when my mother had tried to break into my apartment. Some changes were painful, others healing, but all of them necessary. My mother had been charged with multiple felonies: identity theft, fraud, embezzlement, invasion of privacy. Her mental health evaluation had revealed a personality disorder that explained some of her behavior, though it excused none of it. She'd ultimately accepted a plea deal that included mandatory psychiatric treatment along with probation and restitution payments. I hadn't spoken to her since that day, and I wasn't sure I ever would again. My father, or rather Randall, as I'd started thinking of him, had moved out of the family home and into a small apartment across town. We were rebuilding our relationship slowly, carefully, with the help of a family therapist. He'd finally told me the full story of my biological parentage, a brief affair with a colleague that my mother had discovered too late to end the pregnancy without questions being raised. The colleague had moved away before I was born, never knowing about me. Randall had chosen to raise me as his own, a decision he claimed never to have regretted, despite my mother's constant reminders of my origins. DNA doesn't make a father, he told me during one of our therapy sessions. Love does. And I did love you, Eve, even if I was too weak to protect you from your mother's resentment. That failure will haunt me for the rest of my life. My brother Cody and I were navigating a new kind of sibling relationship, one based on truth rather than competition. He'd been shocked to discover the extent of our mother's manipulation, how she'd pitted us against each other from childhood. With her influence removed, we were slowly discovering we actually had things in common, including a shared determination to break the cycle of toxicity that had defined our family for too long. Grandma Jean had become my rock through it all. At 73, she'd taken over the family business again, cleaning up the financial mess my mother had created. She'd also become my fiercest advocate, insisting that the Parker name and legacy belonged to me as much as anyone, regardless of biology. Family is more than blood, she'd declared firmly when I'd hesitantly asked if I should change my last name. You're a Parker through and through, more so than Jacqueline ever was. As for me, I'd spent the past months rebuilding my credit, securing my apartment with a proper security system, and focusing on my law school applications. The experience had solidified my desire to specialize in family law, particularly cases involving financial abuse and identity theft. Eve? I turned to see Taylor walking toward me across the campus green, waving excitedly. I can't believe you're really doing this, she said, giving me a hug. Law school, it's happening. Finally, I agreed, smiling. And I couldn't have done it without you. It wasn't an exaggeration. Taylor had been my unwavering support through the darkest moments, the police interviews, the court hearings, the nights when the full weight of all I'd learned threatened to crush me. She'd reminded me to eat, to sleep, to breathe when it all became too much. Have you told your dad yet? She asked, as we walked toward the campus coffee shop. We're having dinner tonight, I confirmed. Cody's coming too. That's progress, right? Taylor knew how complicated my feelings toward both men remained. It is, I acknowledged. Slow, messy progress, but still progress. Over coffee, I filled her in on the latest developments. The family therapy sessions that were gradually breaking down decades of dysfunctional patterns. My grandmother's decision to eventually leave the business to Cody and me jointly, provided we both completed business management courses. The tentative plans for a Parker family gathering minus my mother at Thanksgiving. You know what amazes me most? Taylor said as I finished updating her. How you've managed to rebuild instead of just burning everything down. After what they put you through, no one would have blamed you for walking away from all of them. I considered her words carefully. I thought about it, I admitted. But then I realized that's what my mother would have wanted for me to be as alone and bitter as she is. And I refused to give her that satisfaction. Plus, I continued, not everyone in my family was toxic. My grandmother never gave up on me. And my dad and brother, they were victims of my mother's manipulation too, in their own ways. Not to the extent I was, and they certainly made their own choices, but still, breaking the cycle means giving people the chance to change, not just cutting them off. As we left the coffee shop and walked back toward the administration building where I'd scheduled a meeting with my academic advisor, I felt a sense of contentment I'd never known before. Not perfect happiness. My family situation was still too complex for that, but a deep satisfaction in knowing I was finally living life on my own terms. Miss Parker? A woman in a smart business suit approached me. I'm Dean Winters. We spoke on the phone about your scholarship application. Taylor gave me an encouraging nod and stepped away to give us privacy. Thank you for meeting with me, I said, shaking the dean's hand firmly. Your personal essay was quite compelling, she said as we walked toward her office. Using your experience with financial abuse to fuel a career in family law. It's exactly the kind of perspective we value in our program. I smiled, thinking about how much had changed in 6 months. From a woman too afraid to confront her mother's abuse to someone whose story was compelling rather than shameful. From a victim to a survivor, and soon, to an advocate who could help others escape similar situations. That evening, as I sat across from Randall and Cody at a small Italian restaurant downtown, I thought about how far we'd all come. The conversation still had awkward pauses and careful navigation around certain topics, but it was honest in a way our family interactions had never been before. To new beginnings, Randall proposed a toast, his eyes meeting mine with cautious hope. And to truth, I added, clinking my glass against his and Cody's. And family, Cody finished. The kind we choose to be, not the kind we were told to be. As we shared a meal without the toxic presence that had dominated our family dynamics for so long, I reflected on the strange path that had brought us here. My mother's attempt to break down my door had instead broken down the walls of deception she'd built around us all. Her crowbar had never touched my apartment, but it had cracked open decades of secrets and lies. And what she'd seen in my hands that day, not a weapon, but evidence of her crimes, and the truth she'd tried so desperately to hide, had indeed made her scream in horror. Not because I'd threatened her physically, but because for the first time in her life she couldn't control the narrative anymore. The truth had set me free, even as it had led to her downfall. And in that freedom, I'd discovered strength I never knew I possessed. "Eve?" Cody interrupted my thoughts. "You okay? You looked miles away." I smiled at my half-brother, the golden child who'd turned out to be just as damaged by our mother's manipulations as I was. "I'm good," I said. "Actually, I'm better than good. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." And I was. Not despite the pain and chaos of the past 6 months, but because of it. The journey had been brutal, the revelations devastating. But on the other side of that devastation lay a life rebuilt on honesty, boundaries, and genuine connection. Some families are born, others are forged through fire. And some, like the new version of mine, are carefully reconstructed from the wreckage of what came before, stronger at the broken places, wiser for the wounds, and determined never to repeat the mistakes of the past. As I looked at the two men across from me, imperfect, fragile, but trying, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Family wasn't about perfection. It wasn't even about biology. It was about choosing every day to be better than our worst instincts, to love despite disappointment, to forgive without forgetting, to move forward together, eyes wide open to both the beauty and brokenness of our shared humanity. That was the lesson I'd carry with me into law school, into my career, and into whatever family I might create in the future. Not the twisted version of loyalty my mother had demanded, but the authentic connection that can only grow in the light of truth. Have you ever had to stand up to toxic family members or set boundaries with people who claim to love you? Sometimes the hardest part of growing up isn't leaving home, but realizing the home you thought you had never really existed. I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. What helped you find the strength to break free from unhealthy relationships? If my story resonated with you, please consider giving this video a like. Your support helps others find stories that might help them through similar struggles. And if you want to hear more personal journeys of overcoming family trauma and building healthier relationships, subscribe to this channel for weekly updates. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that they're not alone in their family struggles. Sometimes knowing others have walked the same path can be the first step toward healing. Thank you for listening to my story. Remember, you deserve to be treated with respect and love, especially by those who claim to care about you. Wishing you strength and peace on your own journey of self-discovery.